The opinions expressed are those of the host. The material is for informational purposes only. It does not constitute investment advice, and it is not intended as an endorsement for any specific investment. Visit crestmontpw.com for more details.
Welcome to the Ascent. This is Sam McGee with Crestmont Private Wealth, and we are recording in the Crestmont studio here with Baron Wiley of Boerne Radio. He's got his mobile unit up, and we are recording here with Alec Walker, our EVP of Financial Planning, coming in from our Houston office. Welcome to the show, Alec.
Good morning. Happy to be here.
So today we're going to be talking a little bit about financial literacy and the delta or the difference between spouses. Alec, I know you've seen this a lot, and we're not going to pick on one gender or another here today. We're just really going to present some facts and some things that we see in data from surveys. So we will actually source some of these things as we talk through it. Over the years, I have seen so many cases of people that have one spouse who controls everything or has access to everything or is very educated and financially literate, where another spouse may not be. And I'm not really sure that that's a good recipe for when one spouse passes or becomes incapacitated or becomes sick or maybe has early onset dementia or something like that. So, Alec, what have you seen? I mean, some things that maybe you've come across over the years.
Yeah, there's been a mixed approach, and there's no right answer or wrong answer. Each person is different. My wife, Kelsey, would say that she is going to be more on the financially illiterate side and doesn't really care to be as involved in that. But one thing that we try to do is make sure that we're both engaged on what is happening. She may want to defer a lot of the major decision making because, that's kind of what we do. We kind of help families make financial decisions. So she's like, well, you should help us do that. But it's important to have engagement amongst both so that at least the other spouse who doesn't care to have much interest maybe or doesn't want to be involved is aware. And I think that's something that I've noticed in working with our clients over the last 10 years is the relationships where at least both spouses are engaged and they want to meet tend to be the most productive, where we have the most productive conversations, where there's the most back and forth dialogue on financial goals, objectives, desires. Certain relationships where maybe one spouse is not engaged, meaning they're not involved in meetings, you can feel the gaps there.
I think that's something that over, I would say, the last 5 years, we've done a better job of not necessarily requiring, but making it a really strong preference that we have both spouses in meetings once a year to go over their entire financial situation. So in a break glass in event of emergency, they know A, who to call, B, where things are, how much they have or they don't have, or what kind of debt they have or don't have, just basic stuff. I mean, we're not talking about where's the password to get into my account and, where's the safe and where are the wills. And there's so many little details that are also important to know. And we hear that routinely when you hear of a client's parents passing away, maybe a second death or a first death, just the mess sometimes that clients will go through while grieving of just trying to find stuff, right? So Are you saying that some of the recipe there for defraying that is just engagement?
It's 100% engagement. Talking about some of the data out there, 44% of married couples report disagreements about money as the top source of conflict. And so just making sure that having both spouses engaged in the meeting, you talked about where passwords are, estate plans, information. We've got sources and solutions for that using the client vault as a way to electronically store all that information. But I think what's even more important than that is just having simple conversations about the balance sheet, the accounts. How are we provided our retirement income every week, every month? What does that look like from a high level to provide a sense of comfort and calm? I think something that we've noticed a lot recently is sometimes clients' main reason of working with an advisor is making sure that their spouse is going to be taken care of when one of them passes, that there's a plan in place, a trusted partner that's going to look after them.
Yeah, there was a study by Lusardi and Mitchell in 2017 that talked about 73% of these cases where the more financially literate spouse handled the investment decisions. But if the less literate spouse became widowed or divorced, they're going to be completely unprepared to manage the finances, which then can lead to mismanagement, running out of money, or fraud, vulnerability, right? So I think that engagement you're talking about is so important. I mean, we have just piles and piles of statistics on this. And as you think about it, it's not just you and your spouse, it's also about your kids. And here we are in the depths of the dog days of summer here in Texas. And it's maybe a good reminder when it starts getting really, really hot in Texas. That's when the kids are home or they're coming home from college, or maybe they're traveling with them and their adult children. It's a good time to think about talking about money with them, because you're probably going to be around them at the holidays. Probably not the best time to talk about money. Okay, let's be honest. Nobody really wants to talk about money over Thanksgiving and Christmas because you're already arguing over the Jell-O and everything else already. But over the summer, you got a little extra time. And when we get back to these statistics and we think about a couple little factoids here, 71% of parents say that they are reluctant to talk to their kids about money. That's straight out of T. Rowe Price in 2023. And when one parent is financially illiterate, these conversations rarely happen. Rarely happen. So that gets back to the whole point of you can have a really strong financially literate spouse. The other one is maybe not literate. And then that could be that they don't talk about money, which is kind of surprising. I mean, Alec, you and I are sitting here kind of grinning on FaceTime at each other, about this and probably thinking about, oh gosh, maybe this could be us, because here we are in this business and both of our spouses are not probably as engaged as maybe we would want them to be. And, we can look in the mirror a little bit and say, hey, that's maybe something we can work on ourselves. So just thinking, go ahead.
And thinking about home with the kids in summer, those habits, conversations that you may be having at the house, we know that the little ears around the house are picking up on that as well. And a study from Cambridge University in 2017 that said that children form core money habits potentially as early as age 7. And I've seen that personally in our household starting already, very minor things. Our daughter, who's about 3.5, says, she's got these toy credit cards and wants to bring them when we go to the grocery store to pay for the groceries, but she calls that her money. So even now, she understands that the little plastic card is money, even at that early of an age. So, it makes me think we need to start having those conversations. So she realizes, well, what is that? How does money work? Because it's happening early on.
Yeah. So I have one that's turning 16 and we're in the market for a vehicle. And yeah, that's pretty wild. And so when we think about that, there's so many ways that you can have your child be involved in paying for or contributing or having some skin in the game on a vehicle, whether it's paying for the auto insurance like I did when I was a kid, or paying a part of the payment if you have a payment, or being responsible for the gas or something. And let's be honest, I mean, kids at 16 are not going to be having really high-paying jobs. So it's really about the concept of them learning the concept. And, as you talked about your daughter with a little plastic card going to the grocery store, it makes me think of if we had a car payment and my daughter was responsible for a component of that, I'm not going to have her pay me. I'm going to have her look at that invoice, right? So she can see what it is and, have a sense of pride of paying that. So, yeah, that's a really interesting point. I think that engagement is huge. And at an early age, it already starts.
And tying that back to kind of married couples sharing the responsibility as well in the finances, there are ways to do that as well. They break down different management styles in terms of couples. It's where there's a driver where one spouse is handling everything. There's the passenger where one spouse was minimally involved. And then you've got the kind of the divide and conquer where maybe each spouse handles a different aspect. And so that could be something, I think I've seen it in our world. Maybe one spouse is a little bit more kind of locked into the asset allocation in the portfolio, and the other spouse is kind of more focused on the cash flow or the expenses and things like that. So if each spouse has a different area of responsibility potentially, and we can help facilitate that engagement, that leads to a lot more potential long-term financial success.
I think we have a pretty wide audience. So there's people here listening right now that may be in that baby boomer generation, 70 plus, and then some that are Gen X that are my generation, and then Alec, your generation, which is not far behind mine, and then you've got Gen Zs, and everyone interacts with money a little bit differently. The 80-year-old lady that still uses a checkbook, which, oh gosh, I can't stand checks because of fraud, but you have that, and then you have, like my kids teaching me how to use certain apps that they're using now for Greenlight, as an example. So as you're listening to this, and I am talking to you, that listener right now, as you're listening to this, think about how you could make your experience for your spouse or your future spouse better by being more inclusive, more engaged in your finances, because ultimately, at some point, as you get older and as things happen that are out of your control, you don't want to leave a mess to someone else, right? And so, Alec, I think that we see that maybe our younger generation clients have more of a dual approach, a little bit more both engaged. And I will say commonly I've seen from maybe the baby boomers, and it's not always, but typically we've seen kind of the husband be more of the driver of the investments, and maybe the spouse is more in the bill pay, so to speak. So there's some engagement, but just being involved once a year and seeing everything. How beneficial do you think that could be?
It could be extremely beneficial. And I think back to some advice I got from a mutual friend of ours early in my career and before I got married, talking about playbooks as it relates to finances or even raising a family. And, Kelsey's family may have grown up with a different playbook than my family, and it's kind of merging those two together. And I think that same philosophy can be applied to a married couple of 25 to 30 years. You've developed your playbook over your lifetime, but maybe there's some ways to add some new plays or get rid of some old plays that aren't working anymore and work together in a more cohesive manner, and maybe with a financial advisor to help show you some of those plays that you can run.
That's great, including budgeting too. Yeah, that's important.
That's right.
That's important. Well, I think that's all we have time for today, and we've been talking about financial literacy across generations and the importance of engagement for the whole family and understanding where money is coming from, how it's managed, where it's going, so you can live a more fruitful life. We hope you've enjoyed this show today, and I hope you have a great weekend. God bless.